Welcome to Spicer and Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsey Keith. Protests and riots continued across the country, and in the chaos, 5 officers were shot.
Yeah, that's right. But here in the nation's capital, while there were plenty of people out in the streets protesting, it was a very different scene. Protesters were actually met by a large police presence. The streets surrounding the White House, and we showed you all those yesterday, were last night blocked off, and those ignoring the curfew restrictions were arrested. Protests were relatively peaceful, and there was a significant presence around all of Washington, D.C. and throughout most of these cities. In other parts of the country, however, clashes between the police and protesters boiled over. In more than 40 cities, there were instituted curfews that didn't seem to help in certain areas. Some of it may have been timing. And actually, if you saw, protesters were targeting the police and anger and looting all over. In St. Louis, for example, 4 police officers were shot during violent protests. All 4 suffered non-life-threatening injuries. And in other parts of the city, agitators dumped gasoline on police officers. Meanwhile, a Las Vegas police officer is on life support after a gun went off as police were trying to disperse a crowd. And in New York City, cops were targeted by moving vehicles. In the Bronx, an NYPD sergeant was struck by a hit and run as police were responding to a break-in at a pawn shop. Upstate New York in Buffalo, 3 cops were seriously injured by an SUV that ran right into them. The driver of the vehicle and passengers are all in custody, but this comes on top of the president saying that he's going to deploy the military if mayors and governors can't get their cities and states under control. Take a listen.
I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights.
Well, the big question is, right, have we reached a point where the police need the military to come add to them? So joining us now to answer all that and more is former Boston Police Chief Daniel Linskey. Chief, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
So last night in D.C., it was quite calm. I mean, relatively speaking, from the night before. The mayor's curfew was the previous night at 11. Last night it was at 7. But in cities like New York, it was quite a different scene. In fact, Governor Cuomo has now come out against Mayor de Blasio and said that what he and the NYPD did in New York was embarrassing. Why is the scene different in different cities in terms of what the police response is?
Well, policing a community is not a cookie cutter solution. So you have to police the community, and the community has to police with you. You have to have consensus on how the community wants to police, how you're going to engage with each other, what your relationships are. So what happens in New York and what the resources are in New York and the circumstances in New York are different than what happens in Boston and different than the relationships police in Miami have. And we need to be aware of those individual challenges in neighborhoods. We need to respect them, understand them, and make them part of any policing solution going forward when we're trying to figure out this issue of basically issues of racism and class that are societal in nature and right now playing out in the policing world.
Chief, the president said that he will deploy the military if necessary. Are you concerned at all about the militarization of this?
Yeah, I'm a United States Marine. I love our Marines, and I love all our military personnel. I think policing should be between members of the community and the police. And I think our military should continue to do what they do, is protect us from others who seek us harm outside our country. Certainly National Guard is a separate entity, and I do think National Guard support is needed here. National Guard comes from the community that they're assisting law enforcement and policing. And the solution to getting control and getting this movement that's moving across the country back in line where we start to deal with the issues instead of dealing with peaceful protests that is being hijacked all over the place by individuals intent on looting, rioting, and engaging in violent crime. The best solution to that is the same solution with keeping communities safe on a daily basis: community policing, building relationships with those people in the community that are involved on a daily basis with law enforcement, making sure that everyone has a seat at the table and everyone is heard and respected.
Chief, I get that, right? But it's interesting because I haven't seen a police officer or anyone in law enforcement that doesn't agree that what happened to George Floyd was reprehensible, right? But how do you overcome this concern in the black community that they keep seeing it over and over and over again, and that we keep saying, we got you, we heard it, but nothing changes?
We have to do more than just have marches and words, right? We need action. And we've done reports, and we've seen reports that have come up with things we need to do better, and years go by, and yet it continues to happen. I think we need to we dig our heels in on both sides of the issue. So as a police chief, when a report would come out and say that my officers were disparately impacting the community we serve, well, that must mean that we're racist and we racially profile. So we would put our backs up and say, that's not true. That's not the way we do business. That's unheard of. And when I became senior up in the ranks, I started to look at the data, and I realized we do disparately impact the communities of color. And we do have issues and concerns. Maybe not consciously, but unconsciously. And some of that is not just the police, right? I think we want to understand the police are the focus of this right now, but it's a societal issue. You saw in New York where the woman who's a financial person was concerned because she was called on for having her dog in violation of the rules. And she began to take, umbrage and call the police to have them come in for somebody who was asking her to comply with the rules of the park. Well, the police that respond to that, they're the authoritative figure. But was that their bias that brought them to that park, or was it the bias of the caller? And we've seen that in instances across the country. So, I would like to finally have both sides. And the police have to understand the protesters have a point. There's some truth in was said here. And any police officer who looked at that video and is not disgusted by what they saw needs to turn in their badge. We don't need them in the job. We don't need them policing our communities.
Yeah.
But we also need the other side to give a little bit to say, cops are all racist, and cops all them. There are cops every day. There are cops in Boston every day that put themselves in harm's way when they are totally legally justified and within our rules and regulations justified in using force, and they don't do it. And there are cops who care so passionately about their communities, and it's so hurtful when they're trying to protect the people's right to say what they want to say, and they're physically attacked and assaulted, especially when you've got good community people that are being used by groups, left, right, group, out group, groups outside the country, who are trying to use their protest, which is righteous, to have human shields while they throw rocks, bottles, and firebombs at cops.
Right. No, I appreciate it. I know, this is a majority of these cops, if high preponderance of them, are good people that put their life on the line for us every day. And so I appreciate what all of you are doing, what you've done, and I appreciate you sharing all of your insights with us today.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Well, up next, we're going to speak to a former Antifa member on what really happens behind the scenes and how you get into one of these groups and what compelled him to step away from it. All of this in what people are calling a terrorist group. And later in the show, we continue our special series, Blocked and Banned, Social Media Censorship of the Right. Today, conservative commentator Candace Owens is going to tell us about her run-ins with social media. Last month, Twitter put her in a timeout for urging the people of Michigan to open up their businesses and earn a living. Imagine that. Candace is going to join us a little later with her story, so stay tuned.